I never thought I'd be telling the story. But some truths fester in the dark, and if you don't let them out, they consume you. It started with a single question, one my husband asked so casually over dinner that I almost choked on my wine. What would you think about being with another man? I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But his expression was serious, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. My stomach tightened. Why would you ask that? His gaze locked onto mine. I think it could be exciting. Exciting. That was the word he used. Not strange, not concerning, not even wrong. Just exciting. I should have ended the conversation there. I should have asked why the man he had in mind had to be black. But I didn't. Because part of me, one I barely recognized, was already curious. My name is Lauren, and for the last 8 years I've been married to David. On the surface, our marriage was the kind most people envied. We had a beautiful home in the suburbs, the kind with a perfectly manicured lawn and neighbors who smiled but never pried. We hosted dinner parties, took vacations to Europe, and never fought over money. But beneath that polished surface, something had been missing for a long time. David was always the charming, confident type, the kind of man who could command a room with just a glance. He was successful, driven, and in many ways a good husband. But over the last couple of years, intimacy had become something scheduled, almost mechanical. I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me the way he used to. The way a man looks at a woman he truly desires. And maybe I had changed too. Somewhere between marriage routines and the unspoken disappointments we both carried, I had stopped feeling seen. That's why his question unsettled me. We were sitting at our candlelit dining table when he said it, our plates still half full. The aroma of roasted salmon lingered in the air, the low hum of jazz playing from the speakers in the corner. I remember gripping my wine glass, feeling the cool stem press into my fingers, anchoring me to the moment. At first, I told myself it was just a fantasy. People had fantasies, right? But as the days passed, David kept bringing it up, casually, subtly, like planting a seed he knew would eventually take root. He talked about it in a way that made it seem natural. I just think it could be freeing for you, he said one night as we lay in bed, to experience something different, something new. The way he said it, so assured, so eager, made my skin prickle. I didn't know if I should feel flattered or offended. And then came the detail that twisted in my stomach like a knife. I was thinking, maybe a black man. I blinked at him, trying to process. Why does that matter? His lips curled into something between a smirk and a shrug. It's just different. I think you'd like it. That was the moment I should have said no. I should have rolled over and ended the conversation. But instead, I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and loaded. Because for the first time in years, I felt something more than routine. I felt wanted, and that terrified me more than anything. I told myself I wouldn't think about it. I told myself that David's suggestion was absurd, that it said more about him than it did about me. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the rhythmic breathing of my husband beside me, I caught myself wondering, what would it be like? Not just the act itself, but the feeling, the rush of being seen, of being desired in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. And that's when David introduced Chris. It was a Saturday evening, and we were at a bar downtown, one of those dimly lit lounges where the music was just soft enough to allow for conversation. David had been acting unusually attentive all night, his hand on my lower back, his lips brushing my ear when he spoke. It had been a long time since he'd touched me like that, and then I saw him. Chris was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of polished mahogany. He moved with the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. His smile was easy, his voice deep, and when he looked at me, I felt an unsettling warmth spread through me. David introduced us, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Chris, this is my wife, Lauren. Chris extended his hand, his grip firm but gentle. It's a pleasure. The way he said it, slow, deliberate, made my pulse quicken. I glanced at David, searching for any sign of discomfort, but he was watching me, his expression unreadable. As the night wore on, the three of us talked. I learned that Chris was a personal trainer, that he had a wicked sense of humor, and that he was paying far more attention to me than he was to my husband. Every time his eyes lingered a second too long, a strange mix of excitement and guilt coiled inside me. And David? He just watched. At one point, Chris leaned in slightly, his voice low. "So, is this something you really want?" I swallowed hard, glancing at David. He didn't flinch. He just sipped his drink, waiting. Did I want this? I should have said no. I should have walked away. But instead, I let my lips part, my breath hitching slightly. I don't know. Chris studied me, then nodded, as if he understood something I didn't. David, still unreadable, finally spoke. "Maybe we should find out." And just like that, the night took a turn I could never take back. The hotel room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant city noise filtering through the window. I stood near the edge of the bed, my pulse thudding in my ears, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. Chris was there, his presence both magnetic and overwhelming. He hadn't touched me yet, but the air between us felt charged, thick with unspoken anticipation. And then there was David. He sat in the armchair across the room, his drink in hand, watching. I couldn't look at him. I thought I understood what this was about, that this was just a fantasy for him, something he wanted to orchestrate, to control. But as Chris reached for me, his fingers brushing my wrist, a realization struck me so hard it nearly stole my breath. This wasn't about me. This was about David. I turned, finally meeting my husband's gaze. His expression wasn't one of arousal or excitement. It was something else entirely, something darker. Possession. I saw it then, clear as day. This wasn't about my pleasure or my liberation. This was about him watching, him controlling, him proving something. Either to himself or to me, I wasn't sure. A bitter taste rose in my throat. Why are we really doing this? My voice was barely above a whisper. David tilted his head slightly, as if I'd just asked a question with an obvious answer. "I thought you wanted this." His words were smooth, but his eyes told another story. Chris shifted beside me, sensing the tension. He wasn't just some random man my husband had picked. He was part of something deeper, something I hadn't fully grasped until now. And then it hit me. This wasn't the first time. Maybe not with me, but with someone else. Maybe multiple someones. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. "How long have you been doing this?" David exhaled, a slow, measured sigh, as if he had been waiting for me to ask. "Does it matter?" Chris took a step back, his gaze flickering between us. He wasn't oblivious anymore. He saw the shift, the way my body had gone rigid, the way realization had stolen whatever curiosity I had left. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was something darker. Something about power, about control. About a man who had never really seen me as anything more than a piece in his carefully curated world. I turned to Chris, my voice steady now. "I can't do this." His nod was slow, understanding. He had nothing to prove. David, on the other hand, just watched. And when I met his gaze for the first time in our marriage, I saw him for exactly what he was. A man who never wanted to share me. I walked out of that hotel room without looking back. Chris didn't try to stop me. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was just a man who had been pulled into something he didn't fully understand. But David sat there, still holding his drink, his gaze steady, unreadable. He didn't chase after me. Maybe he knew it was over. Maybe he had been testing me all along, seeing how far he could push before I finally broke. Or maybe deep down he had never expected me to go through with it. The walk back to our house felt surreal. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was spinning, replaying the night over and over. The way David had watched me, the way he had orchestrated everything like it was some kind of game. And the way I had let him. For years, I had thought of myself as a woman in a marriage that was simply off track. That we had lost something along the way, something that could be rekindled. But standing in our quiet home, surrounded by the life we had built, I saw the truth. This wasn't a marriage. It was a performance. And I was done playing my part. I packed a bag that night. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. David didn't try to stop me when I walked past him, suitcase in hand. He just stood there, his face blank, as if he had already moved on to the next act. As I stepped outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Because for the first time, I wasn't just a wife, a possession, a piece in someone else's fantasy. I was free, and I had no idea what came next. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It thrilled me, a man who wanted to own me, and I realized, with a clarity that cut through me like a blade, this wasn't love. It never had been.